Right, hello everybody. This is a Blue Monday special with an ex-Ipswich Town player and current EFL pundit. So what we're going to do with Sam Parkin is we'll talk about Ipswich Town, we'll talk about some current stuff, we'll obviously talk about his career, and we have a load of questions. Sam, first of all, say hello to the Ipswich fans. Do you have a message for them?
A message for them. Yeah, keep supporting the team this year because I think finally you seem to have a guy in the hot seat that knows what he's doing. So keep the faith because I think I've said in a few mediums this season, Ben, already that I believe Ipswich will be one of those two automatically promoted sides. So we're all the team to success.
Hashtag Ask Sam. Can we get a view from him on the new signings we've made? Presume he'll have seen a lot of Luongo as he follows Swindon still, and just the perspective as an EFL watcher and fellow forward on Hurst and Broadhead. So those three already in this January.
Yeah, I mean, Luongo's getting on a bit, isn't he, in terms of age? I really liked him at Swindon. I was frustrated with Luongo because I felt he had more to give in terms of goals and assists. Yet he's kind of just crept back a little bit in terms of his position in the last 5 years or so, where he's a bit more of a controller now, but very secure in possession. I don't think any supporters of clubs that he's turned out for recently would say anything but positive things about him. So, yeah, he's probably not going to get forward and get you goals from midfield like he maybe did in his younger years at Spurs and at Swindon. But, yeah, technically very gifted, two-footed, clever footballer, good mentality. I think a really good addition in League One.
What about the other two forwards? Because they've been after Hurst for a long while and couldn't get that done in the summer. And Broadhead obviously must have been promoted twice then with Sunderland and Wigan. I might be wrong about that. Someone will correct me surely in the comments. But
yeah, he was on the bench, wasn't he, for Sunderland in the playoff final? He came on, I think, for a couple of minutes.
Do you know what? I was there and I can't remember.
He came on because I just remember them being quite well stocked going into that final in the forward positions. Thinking, blimey, that's some strength if he can't get in. Right. I think the Sunderland fans loved him. I thought that was a strange move, to be honest, this season, going to Wigan. I'm not sure if he had the opportunity to go back to Sunderland, but he is more of a predatory striker, really good finisher. Not going to be as strong with his back to goal maybe as Hurst, but no, I really like him. I think League One's probably below his level. So this is a great coup for Ipswich, despite, obviously Ipswich being in a great position to get promoted, and he will think that that's going to materialise. Hurst, I think he's had a real up and down career, despite being, such a young lad. But what I did see during a run of games at Portsmouth with someone who's got every attribute. He's quick. He's obviously got good stature. He's got decent
huge,
touch.
Isn't he? I saw in the picture with Mark Ashton, he's about a foot taller than him, isn't he?
Yeah, good touch. Can finish, probably needs to be a bit more dominant aerially, and that may happen as he learns the game and physically feels out a little bit. But I thought he did a brilliant job during that period for Danny Cowley at Portsmouth. I was really impressed with him, and I don't know if that was just belief, confidence, bit of fitness with playing week in, week out, but I think they've got someone with great potential there. I don't think he's the finished article and may need a little bit of work, maybe on his game and also on the mental side of things. But I mean, I remember having this conversation with you. I felt it was going to be a tall order for Ladapo to continue to get the goals, have the burden, churn out game after game. So to add those two, I think that probably gives them enough now in my mind to go and achieve what they want to.
On that point, hashtag Ask Sam, when a good news striker signed for your club personally, were you happy the club were improving, or worried about your place? And I suppose that goes for Ladapo at the moment. Did that happen to you in your career?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, really. It depends. I mean, this will give a little bit of insight to my mentality when I was at Swindon. We signed some some really good players at Swindon. We had Tommy Mooney come in, Rory Fallon, to name a few more. We had James Milner come on loan. Johnny Jackson came on loan. Dean Marnie came on loan. You know, we had top Premier League loanees, good strikers, you know, competition for me. Who else do we have? Michael Proctor came in from Sunderland. We always were really active in the loan market. And whenever I saw a new signing, either standing on the pitch, that, you know, with a view to signing was going to join in the next few days, or someone having their first training session, my character during that time was, I'm the number one here. You know, watch what I can do this morning. I had that mentality at Swindon. Nobody's going to take my place. Almost like I'm the top dog here. It inspired me to grow, to improve, to show off to a degree. And then probably latterly, I probably didn't have that confidence at other clubs. But, you know, another example, when Alan Lee came to Ipswich, granted I was injured, but me and Alan hit it off immediately. And I never saw Alan as a threat. I saw Alan as someone moving from one end of the country, or from another country, I think it was from Cardiff, from Wales to Suffolk. I saw it as someone who, like me a year previously, needed the support of his teammates, a friend and stuff like that. And we became great mates, me and Alan. So no, it never bothered you really. Your destiny is decided by what you do, isn't it, on the training ground and how you perform. You know, managers don't get it. They don't get it wrong too often. They're going to pick the person who's in form and who deserves to be playing. So, yeah, it generally inspired me. Although with the injuries and stuff like that, it was probably better when I was at clubs where there wasn't too many to choose from.
We'll come back to some more hashtag Ask Sam. You touched on Swindon. Can you just talk about being I suppose Chelsea would have been considered one of the elite at that point when you were there. That was just turning, wasn't it? And the trophies were starting to be won. What was it like being a youngster at Chelsea who was around there at the time, and, you know, working that loan system to get your experience?
It was probably a different type of elite, if that makes sense. Because
it's pre-Abramovich, right?
Pre-Abramovich, but with a history of producing a vast amount of young players. Hence the reason I chose to go to Chelsea, when, as you can imagine, young footballers in Greater London, you have the pick of a number of clubs. So, of course, I had a look at my options, but Chelsea were producing so many players through the 80s, 90s. It was a bit of a no-brainer. Obviously, location-wise, it was great for me, and it felt like a great fit. It just happened to transpire that it was a period of huge change. I kind of signed, and then we had Ruud Gullit replaced by Vialli, an influx of the best players in the world. Latterly, or like you say, Abramovich, Claudio Ranieri, even more change and even more legendary players come in. So my path to the first team was obviously not clear and blocked by, I always say, Mick, you know, when I was maybe on the cusp of getting an opportunity, they signed Mikel Forsell, who's probably pound for pound the best young striker in the world, or in Europe at that time. And that's what you were up against. But yeah, we had all those guys. You know, I learned so much off Vialli, who obviously we lost in the last week or so, which was terribly sad for his mates and the people who played with him, his family. But even for us young players who were around him, he was great. You know, he knew all of our names. He was quite mischievous. I learned loads from him, stuff that I took to my last few days playing professional football in terms of his movement. For someone who wasn't blessed with great pace, very, very clever footballer. So we used to watch him, used to spend hours and hours sitting out on the training ground watching Gianfranco Zola take free kicks. Just marvel at the accuracy, the consistency of his free kicks. And, you know, I was in a youth team with John Terry, and John Harley's my big mate. So two guys that made it into the first team. Great players. Example that it could still be done. Unfortunately, it didn't materialise for me. But I think once I'd gone out and had a taste of first team football elsewhere, kind of my hunger was to go out and make my own road and hopefully get back into the Premier League. A little bit of a detour, and obviously when I went to Ipswich, that was very much at the forefront of my mind. I was an ex-Chelsea kind of protege youngster, and I was kind of on that upward trajectory to get back into the Premier League, which was always my plan.
We've got hashtag Ask Sam. What is the general perception of ITFC amongst the pro footballer community? Can you kind of parlay where you were in terms of what you were just saying? That was a possible route back to the Premier League.
Yeah.
And how's Ipswich, excuse me, perceived? Because at worst, people think, oh, it's an outpost in the middle of nowhere who were good once, and at best, people think this is a great club that had these two legendary England managers, etc.
I think people probably have the misconception that it's a bit of a sleepy part of the country, and that it's a little bit, out on an air but not near anywhere, which I think is a misconception because it's not too far away at all. I think everyone's got huge. Anyone who knows anything about football, any guys who play who prior to becoming professionals were supporters of a club, big fans of players, or just football nuts like I was growing up, you understand the history of Ipswich and realise what a big club it has been and has the potential to become again in terms of stature standing in the league. So I think everyone, I think when there was a plethora of clubs kind of in for me during that period at Swindon. I think when my mind was kind of made up as soon as I realised Ipswich were in for me. I think that gives a good indication. I think anyone that's like-minded, that knows the history of football and has followed it, since being a young boy, can understand that. It still had this great pull, even though they were in the Championship and hadn't been in the Premier League for a few years, and obviously managed by Joe Royle at the time. Yes, there's better stadiums in the country in better nick, but it's got that character, that history. You can still feel it when I come to cover a game. So I think everyone thinks that Ipswich deserve to be in a higher division, and probably a lot of people hope that that's going to happen as well.
You're almost starting to get to the point with it having been like the 2 years prior to you joining they were both playoff years, and it feels like the plateau of the club. And what you're saying there, circa 2005, you do start to wonder, what does now how old were you when you signed for Ipswich?
24, I think I was.
Yeah, what does a 24-year-old now think, though? Do you know what I'm saying in respects of, their perception of Ipswich might be totally different now, given the past sort of 15 years. Hashtag Ask Sam. Did he feel any burden of pressure given his transfer from Swindon was one of ITFC's largest fees post-administration?
I don't think I did initially at all. I didn't think about the fee. I think the challenge probably dawned on me a few months in. I think it was a difficult time. It was a difficult time. It was never about the fee, really. I think you touched on it there. The previous year had been a playoff season, and I think there was enormous expectation from outside that it would be a team that would challenge again. And I think that a lot of the players in the squad that I joined wanted me to be Shefki Kuqi Mark II and Nicky Forster to be Darren Bent Mark II. And I thought they were such a successful partnership in the previous years. I think they both got 20 goals. I looked it up the other day in all competitions.
Tommy Miller got 10, 15 as well, didn't he?
Yeah, and they were names that we heard a lot about. And I felt that was a bit of a burden for us. Obviously, I'm going to be really careful about how I word it. You have to take responsibility for your own performances. And ultimately, I didn't play well enough at Ipswich. There are circumstances as to why, I think, and with the hindsight of time now, I believe I have a better understanding as to why I didn't work at Ipswich. But I felt that me going into that side that had such a successful strike partnership, we were really fighting against it from the off. And I was a very different player to Shefki Kuqi. And I think that I have I have regrets about not improving the physical side of my game, not being better aerially and stuff like that. And I was coached later on in my career, and I felt that I maybe wasn't coached enough on the training ground. I think the due diligence is probably done greater levels now as to the type of player that going to fit into a system. I don't think at Swindon I was ever judged on the amount of balls I was winning aerially. Not to say that it was total football I was playing, but they realised my strengths were getting the ball into me around the box to my feet, having the opportunity to engineer space to get shots away. Whereas Ipswich have been so successful with Cucci flicking balls on for Darren Bent to run onto. And I think they tried to mirror that. And I think I could have been coached to become that player. But I think once I'd started poorly and not scored goals in the pre-season, my anxiety grew, especially in front of the home fans. My belief diminished. And I think it was a bit of a knock-on effect that physically I wasn't dominating games. And that had a knock-on effect with my goal scoring as well. So, thinking back, I think we're all quite selfish to a degree, footballers. And I wish I'd have got a little bit more guidance maybe as to where I could help the team, instead of just, listen, Joe picked me every week, which is, I would never have a bad word to say about Joe. I think when I was available, and I think he hoped that it would turn, but I think we've spoken about it a little bit today. I was a 24-year-old lad who had nothing but success the 3 previous years, going into a club that had 25,000 fans there. It was quite a lot, I think, for me to take in. And when it started negatively, I think I just needed a little bit more support from the senior players and maybe coached a little bit more on the training ground. But I'd never, ever criticised Joe or Willie Donaghy, who really tried, some different methods to get me producing. But yeah, it's still a big regret, because obviously knowing what I know now, you would have approached lots of things differently. And some of that would have been me going to the staff and saying, do you know what? This isn't happening. It's not working. Let's stay out for half an hour after training and show me the pattern. Show me where you want me to flick it. Show me how you want me to play with Nicky Forster, and that's just an example. So I think a lot of that does come from you. I think because I was in such a dark place mentally, struggling to win the fans over, struggling with belief, adapting to a new surroundings. Yeah, I think sometimes you train and you get home, don't you? And you wallow in your own self-pity and what have you, whereas I could have been more proactive in making it work.
There's so many of the questions now linked to what you've just said.
Of course.
One
Sorry, I went off on there.
No, it's great. I want to come back to the there's one about Portman Road specifically as well.
Yeah.
Does Sam remember the discussions he had with Joe Royle before he joined about his role for Town? I don't know are you allowed to tell that story you told me? I'll leave that with you. In hindsight, it seems we thought we were getting a big target man, whereas Sam wanted to drop in and play football more.
Yeah.
That sounds fair, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the people will look at me, and we've already discussed today, and say, you're 6'2", you should be battering people and dominating games. And I completely understand that argument, but I felt that I could do that, and I learned how to do that better as I got older. But there were different facets to my game, and there were stronger elements to my game, which at Swindon came to the fore. And in that first year when I went out on loan, I struggled a little bit at Northampton, and different levels completely. Listen, I'm not comparing the two clubs, but similar styles in terms of I played with a little guy who wanted the ball flicked onto him, and I struggled to a degree, probably because, I'd used to Chelsea building a little bit more and being a bit more available for the ball into feet. Yeah. So I think I kind of covered that. I needed to be coached, I think, a little bit more in that regard. And when it wasn't working, I think players are selfish. As long as they're doing okay, they can leave the training ground and be happy. And I was taking that all on board. And each week it was just kind of like going over the same ground, and my performances weren't improving. So it was looking back now, some of it was down to me. not asking for more, not doing extra. But yeah, ultimately, I think that, you know, I wasn't probably the player they felt they were getting as well. I wasn't, you know, going to be able to replicate what had been brought previously.
Fascinating. And Joe, what were the dealings in terms of? Obviously
Joe, sorry,
huge,
yeah,
huge character and huge name. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, a legend of the game, clearly, like a legend of a manager at that point in time. Like, incredible buzz when someone like that wants to sign you, given, you know, what he was in the game, his standing in the game. And yeah, Joe met me he'd been on holiday, so my agent picked him up at Heathrow. So this was very clever if you think about it. I've got, realistically, I think 3 other clubs kind of jostling for my signature. Sorry, that was very cliched, wasn't it? But Joe we picked Joe up at Heathrow Terminal 5, I think it was. So he's obviously conveniently felt I'll have 2 hours in the car with him. And I'd met Watford the previous day. It was AD Boothroyd had just taken over. And so Joe had 2 hours basically in the car with me to schmooze and to try and win me over. And to be honest, my recollection of it is that I walked in remind me the main stand, you know, Ipswich, the name of it. Is it the Cobham stand?
I call it the Pioneer still.
Okay, sorry. So in there, and you've got all the pictures and the history and stuff like that. I think I walked along that. This is how I remember. I walked along that gangway, and my mind was made up. You know, I'd met Joe, I'd seen the ground, I'd seen that history, which I was aware of already, and that was it for me, really. And the plan was to go up to Norwich the following day.
Dun, dun, dun.
Or that night. And I'd not had too much. I don't think I'd spoken to Nigel Worthington at this point, or I may have had a brief conversation. But obviously they had Dean Ashton, our colleague from the EFL show, there at the time. And I thought, like I've said on multiple occasions, me and Dean look identical, and we were similar types of players, yet he was much better than me. So I was never going to get a game at Norwich, was my thinking. Whereas there was a space at Ipswich, an obvious space where I could have got straight into the side. So that was a kind of a footballing reason as to why I wouldn't have gone to Norwich anyway. And I was getting a bit far away from London by the time I got to Ipswich as well. But yeah, it was sold basically on that morning. And then that was it really. I agreed to sign that night. Me and my agent stayed in Dedham in one of those hotels there. Lovely.
Nice Toll-booth, no doubt.
Yeah, and
was Alan Brazil there?
He wasn't, but and you know, I've spoken about some of my regret today, and people say you don't have any regrets. I've got like loads of things I've done differently, especially during that year, 18 months at Ipswich. Like it still hurts today, you know what I mean? And I think I'm big enough to admit that. But that night and that following morning when I signed, apart from having my children, one of the best days of my life. Like incredible. Like I'm a QPR nut, football nut. Played football from 5 years of age. You know, to sign for Ipswich and Joe Royle on a 4-year contract, to be on the Sky Sports ticker and all that, it was dream stuff. Honestly, it was an amazing feeling. One of the best days ever. So, yeah, that's the story. And yeah, Joe was. I think in the weeks prior, when there had been speculation that Ipswich wanted to sign me, Joe was texting me every now and again, just saying. I think he sent me a text. This will please some of the Ipswich fans. He sent me a text saying, "You won't suit yellow, son."
That's no way to talk about Watford now, is it, Sam? Hey.
Yeah, which I thought was he didn't because QPR obviously wanted me as well at the time, but and I think you'd understand when I say that, you know, I'd have played for QPR for nothing. You know, I'd have walked to QPR, and Swindon knew that. Ian Holloway knew that. They just couldn't raise the funds. But I'd spoken to Ollie as well, and obviously I've got to know Ollie in the last few years, and he knows my QPR allegiance. And it's sad that it never materialised. But yeah, in terms of a football move and going to a massive club like Ipswich, it was a no-brainer that day.
Are you able to tell that story about Jim Magilton and your initiation?
Yeah, I mean, I love Jim. It didn't end well between me and Jim. When I left, I was forced out to a degree, which I understand. You know, the more and more as I get older, because I understand that Jim was a new manager, he would have had a budget and he felt I wasn't good enough, or he felt he had a better option. Therefore, you have to move someone out. I understand that. But I love Jim. I respected him so much. My mates loved him. They loved coming up and being in his company. Brilliant character, brilliant captain, great player. One of the best I played with him. And he was last year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
One of the best I played with. Me and my mates always talked about his little bendy feet. You know, he'd be facing one way and he could play it the other way. And he was like a bit like a duck, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But he could, his manipulation of the ball and that was amazing. And for being a striker, having him playing behind you and the demands he put on you were amazing. So as a captain, he'd do everything. Like, you know, if you needed a new car, restaurant booked, he'd be all over that. You know, real old-fashioned type of guy, tickets. But yeah, the Christmas party, my first year, so obviously I was in plaster, I was on crutches that December, but we had a black tie do at Portman Road in the evening, which was for all the staff, if memory serves me right. But we met up early in the day in a nightclub during the day. He got this nightclub to open. And to my memory, there was punters in there as well, probably friends of Jim's, because he knew everyone by then, didn't he? Of course, because he was, you know, he liked to pint, didn't he, Jim? And like, obviously he was like Mr. Ipswich. So there were people in there as well. And he texted me in the lead up to say, you're singing, you're a new signing still. You've got to do initiation, which I thought, I'm going to go back for a beer because I've not seen the lads for a while. You know, obviously had an operation and what have you. And so, no problem, got my song sorted, Vanilla Ice, Ice, Ice Baby, as I always did. Turn up, there's a stage in this nightclub and he's gone full-blown Bob Monkhouse, Des O'Connor, Bruce Forsyth. He's on the stage with a mic and he's got like a script. So when he's bringing us on one after the other, he's got like little funnies and statistics. Oh, mate, he's like, Parkin, yeah, signed for 500 grand. That's 100 grand a goal. He's cost us so far, the useless, like all that. He's introduced us, and I think, like, to my memory, he's got like the dicky bow like draped around his shoulders, you know, like an old 80s
Dean Martin.
Yeah. I mean, it was sensational. But that, I think that encapsulates what type of character he was, what type of captain he was, really. And that summer was hard for me because the following summer, because I hoped, listen, physically, as it happened, physically I wasn't able to play much for Luton subsequently because of the injury. Had never recovered really. There was still a gap in the fracture site. I hadn't recovered essentially. I'd been trying to come back at Ipswich, trying to play reserve games, and I was ending up in considerable amount of pain, and it was really hard physically and mentally. So whether I'd have been able to turn around my Ipswich career is doubtful because of physically. I probably need another few months on the sidelines. But Jim did call upon me a couple of times at the start of that season, as I recall. One was away at Leicester, if memory serves me right, and he had a brilliant Barney with Nicky Forster at half time. And Nicky went back at him, and Jim just went ballistic and just basically went, I was basically like trying to be flogged. They were trying to get rid of me. But Jim was basically like so mad. He was like, right, Nicky, off. Sam, you're on. Like, I was thinking I'm never going to play for Ipswich again at this stage. And I went on and did really well. You know, to my credit, because I knew that they were trying to get me out of the club. And I don't know if it was a difficult predicament that Jim was presenting with then, but I remember they played Peterborough in the football, the EFL Cup, or whatever it was called then, on the Tuesday, maybe following that. And I was all set to start. And Jim basically had an argument with my agent, still, you know, obviously trying to get the move to go through. And I was really conflicted at that stage. And I think Jim or my agent called me and just went, you're not playing now. Like, you're not playing now. Like, that's, like, I think my agent was called Aaron Lincoln at the time. He was John Terry's agent. He was the old kit man at Chelsea. Very, very funny guy, full of life. He probably gave Jim a bit, and they probably had a Barney because they were both quite charismatic. But I got the call to say, you're not playing now. And that was it, really. And I went into Ipswich with my kind of tail between my legs a few times that week when the deals were going on. I was maybe going to go to Preston, and then obviously Luton as well with the other option. And it was difficult because, you know, when you're going in and you feel like you're not supposed to be there, people don't want you there, you're being forced out. Yeah, for a young lad, that was quite tricky after, you know, having that dream move just a year previously. So I'm sure Jim may have some regrets in like the way our personal relationship suffered. Not that we were massive mates, but
Sam as well. At that point, he's making the transition from how you communicate as a captain to how you communicate as a manager. And I mean, you'll know 1,000 times better than me. The bawling and yelling on the pitch isn't going to work for everybody off the pitch, is it? And I suppose he would probably admit that's something that he would have maybe not been too well up on at that point either.
No, I think that was a problem. I think it was more of a problem probably for the senior players, definitely, because there were some run-ins, and we know Jim was very, very, he was temperamental, you know, he was old school Jim, and I admired a lot of that, and there was a place for it as well. But I think it was tricky, and it was funny that I can't remember seeing him too often, but I saw him in Spain. He was worse for wear. I probably was too. I saw him in a well-known bar in Port Banús, and I just went and gave him a cuddle, and we had a laugh. And I said, like, you know, I love you. Like, no hard feelings. Like, I really admire you. It was a tough time, and we had a laugh. Do you know what I mean? And that's the way I've always tried to conduct myself. With, you know, I didn't finish on a great note either at Exeter, like with Paul Tisdale, but I made a point of going to see him a few years later when I was at a game and just having a hug and just saying, like, it was shit, but, you know, I've with retrospect now, I understand, and you've got to be the bigger person, I suppose.
Absolutely. Can we go back to this home away thing with the goal scoring and whatnot? Because there's a couple of questions about it. Hashtag ask Sam, scoring record away from home was pretty good if I recall, just couldn't get going at home, so got a bit of stick, easy scapegoat. And then someone's added, Seb, I think he hit the post from a corner against Cardiff on his debut and forced to end up scoring the winner. Sliding doors moment, perhaps. There's another one. Does he think not scoring at Portman Road hurt him? Is there any sense in that? Because obviously the hardcore fans are travelling away, aren't they? And maybe they're the ones that... But does the kind of perception get built in home games? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it definitely does, 100%. And yeah, knowing each other like we do, you know, I've got that. I remember pretty much every game. That's how I kind of work. I remember every goal. And what frustrated me was that there was some really good performances in there away from home. I remember thinking I'd played really well at Derby, at Coventry, and I didn't score, but I played really well. I'd contributed. Millwall, where I got the goal, I played well. Brighton, where I got the goal, I played well. I didn't play well at Leeds, but got the 2 goals, so that kind of papered over the cracks of that afternoon when we were all a bit rubbish and should have been beaten, but we won at Leeds. So I felt that I was contributing in the away games. And obviously that is to do with the expectancy, the reaction of the crowd, the way that I was going into my shell in the home games. And it's something I've thought about a lot. And the Cardiff game is bang on. I hit the post in the second half. I missed an absolute sitter in the first half where I still don't know what happened. The ball broke to me on the 6-yard box. I could have done anything with it. Could have side-footed it. Could have spanked it. I opted to spank it and just didn't. I still to this day don't understand how I shanked it. I must not have catched it because the goalkeeper threw his hat on it. But it was a type of chance I'd have scored 29 out of 30 in the previous 3 seasons. So I don't understand what happened there. But yeah, I missed the header in the second half. They hit the post. That was a sliding doors moment. That would have undoubtedly meant, you know, if I'd have scored the winner on the opening day in the 25-degree heat in front of 30,000, unquestionably it would have been different for me. But what happened, and I tried to articulate it earlier as best as I can in my view. And again, I have to take responsibility that there were some woeful performances there at Portman Road. I think of the Preston game, which was live on Sky, and I was terrible. The Norwich game, really poor. Watford game, these home games where quite high profile against big clubs, obviously the derby, I didn't do well enough. And I think it was the lack of goals, clearly. I hadn't scored in pre-season, which became problematic straight away in my own mind. If you go into the season, to give you an example, I scored in every pre-season game for Swindon in my first season. Scored in 6 straight games and scored in the first 3 league games of the season. You're going into the first league game where you can walk on water. I was already up against the strike force they'd had previously, the success they'd had previously, the price tag maybe, not my words, but obviously maybe from the outside, that was why people were expecting from me.
And what upper level as well.
Yeah,
and what of the pyramid.
And what I touched on a little bit earlier, if you're not playing well, if you're not dominating games, and big part of that during that period at Ipswich was winning aerial balls, winning headers, then it had a knock-on effect in my game, because you lose a header, you don't hold the ball up, you hear the crowd, they're immediately on you, and that became a big problem for me because physically I wasn't dominating games. I was exerting a lot of effort in trying to be a focal point for the side, but I wasn't succeeding, and that had a knock-on effect, I believe, in my ability to get in goal-scoring positions and score goals. So it had a bit of a knock-on effect, and again, I take responsibility for that. I wasn't good enough in that area of the game, but it wouldn't have half helped if the goalkeeper would have maybe kicked to someone else for a period. At Swindon, I had times when I played with Rory Fan and Tommy Mooney, other strikers, you could take that physical burden, even kick to a wide player, play short. But I think it's quite easy sometimes, especially when we were struggling early part of that season, to just keep putting it towards me. And I think it's quite the easy ball sometimes. And I felt in some of those games, I couldn't have half been helped out. The Preston game sticks out to me because I was dominated physically by the 2 centre-halves and the ball kept on coming. Now, if you're not succeeding in playing one way, you have to try and do something differently.
We're in the definition of madness there,
yeah, and I remember going home that night. That was as low as it became, because not only was my game terribly poor that afternoon, I remember it being really hot, live on Sky. The fans mocked me every time I missed. I lost a duel, and I remember getting a text from one of my Swindon teammates that night, and he took the mickey out of me. And I think that's probably a sign of where the game was, because I mentally was gone, and I probably needed someone to get round me there and to support me, to coach me, to cajole me, anything. And I didn't feel I got that from anyone internally. And like externally, the way it was then was just to take the mick, wasn't it? Rather than to say, "You're all right, mate. Like you look like you're struggling," basically, because I was gone like at that point. So yeah, the questions are bang on. Basically, a mental block had developed, probably in terms of not being in a great physical place because of the amount of energy I was using to try and be that player that I wasn't, essentially. And away from home, shackles are off, aren't they? You're not going to have as much domination. There's going to be more balls in behind. The attacks are going to be a bit more sporadic. I think I played up front a little bit by myself away from home because Nicky was missing, and that gave me, in a weird way, a little bit of freedom. And I didn't. Yeah. Long story short, of course, away from home, I felt a bit freer, and I think that showed in my performances. Obviously, the goals do show you that, but like I said earlier, I think there were some really good performances in there, which kind of get missed. You play away at Derby. And there's, how many would Ipswich take away there? 2,000-3,000 maybe back then. And you go back to Portman Road and there's 10 times that amount on the Tuesday night. that good performance, if you've contributed with your hold-up play, with your build-up, your assists, whatever, that gets completely forgotten or gets missed because 27,000 people aren't there.
Absolutely. Are you able to tell that story about your goal celebration at Brighton, or should we move on from that?
No, that's fine. Yes, no, because I think it's part of the story, isn't it? Because I spoke about it a few times today. I think football's a long way had been a long way behind rugby. In terms of the mental preparation and stuff like that. And of course, I took everything on during that year and a half at Ipswich, where knowing what I do now, water off a duck's back, you're going to get criticism. You just focus internally or get the right advice, speak to sports psychologists, whatever it may be, which I didn't really do at the time. So yeah, I kind of fought every battle that year, which probably didn't help. And I hope today, like speaking about it, if there are some Ipswich fans listening, they'll realise that how privileged I was to come to the club, and how much I think back at it with, it's a mixed bag, but real pride that I still signed for the club. But yeah, at Brighton in the warm up, someone was giving me a bit of stick. And I'd be lying if I said I knew exactly what he looked like, but I knew where he was sitting. So if anyone's seen the goal back, Fabian Wilness put the ball in, didn't he? And I scored near post header, and I was obviously, my momentum was taking me towards the Ipswich fans. I went over the hoarding and I just unleashed in this chap's direction, which I did do latterly in my career. Mainly if you were getting a bit of stick off the opposing side's supporters, I'd see the guy, oh, he's got glasses and a hat on over there, I'll make sure I make a beeline for him if I score, which I did do, but that was a rarity with the home support, and probably just another example of the relationship wasn't rosy at that stage. And I had a few altercations with people away from football. I remember being out with the boys one day, and someone said something derogatory to me, and I kind of...
What about you as a player?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And I gave them a mouthful. And I think a few of the senior lads said, you need to apologise. And I said, I'm not apologising. I said, I'm out here with my friends trying to unwind, and someone's, I wouldn't dream of going into someone's space if they're in a restaurant and giving them stick. But I suppose you become public property a little bit. So there was a few things that went on during that time. And, I think it's important to say, like, Matt Richards was a huge source of friendship to me. That's not a great phrase, but me and Matt had his battles with the crowd, I think, himself. I don't think he ever fully won over the Ipswich supporters, but Matt was a very strong character, which I really admired. If Matt was having a bad game, he'd go and get the ball more, whereas the obvious thing to do is to hide a little bit. Matt was very strong mentally, but me and him spent so many hours together during that. But there were some other lads, Westy, I was close with in Westlake. Some of the lads that came on loan, Jay McEverley, Alan Lee when he joined, but me and Matt were really tight. And I think Matt took it on as well. Like, I remember Matt speaking to me about it and taking it on and asking, about how I was feeling, and upset that his mate was getting grief because he'd probably been through it a little bit before. And I think that's, later in my career, if I saw that happening, I'd go and speak to that younger player. And I felt that I could have done with a little bit more of that, maybe. So yeah, that's. I think it's important to shout out Matt. We lost contact for a few years, but we've reconnected recently, and I got a lot of love for him. I'd love to see him soon.
Absolutely. There's this legendary Mark Fish performance here. There's a question about it.
I love that story.
Obviously, a question about Mark Fish in the QPR game he scored in is needed. And there's another part of this. I didn't know anything about this. And how did he think those at the end of this country summed up his time here?
Oh,
I had to text back and say, what on earth are you talking about? And apparently this is this big BBC comedy that name checks you. So, but Mark Fish first, please.
I think it probably shows that we were in a bit of disarray at the time. This wasn't you know, this wasn't. You've name checked the 3 players they'd lost the previous summer, and I'm sure there were, you know, some big names that had gone.
Kelvin Davis as well.
Yeah, great shout. Yeah, we had 2 rookies, didn't we, in goal essentially, Supps and Lewis Price. So yeah, this was a side that was struggling basically. So much so that when we turned up at Loftus Road that night, none of us had even met Mark Fish. Sorry, I hope this doesn't get anyone in. I hope this doesn't get anyone in trouble, but it's a great story. And obviously, again, it's Mark Fish over there. That's my reaction. You know, that's Mark Fish, brilliant. You know, I'm in a dressing room all of a sudden with Jim, who I'm not idolised, but I'd watched in the Premier League for years. Kev Horlock, we had that Swindon connection. Fabian, people like Jason DeVos that have been around for years. You know, big time Championship players and better. And then there's Mark Fish in there. I think, you know, that's Mark Fish. This is good. Oh, tremendous. All of a sudden he's playing. I'm thinking, he's playing. Like, fine. He might. You know,
did he look fit when you saw him?
You don't know, do you? Really?
No.
You don't know. But he's obviously played for 45 minutes, and they're both mates of mine. So give them a shout. Like, I think Paul Furlong and Kev Gallen, like, give them. I think it was those two. Gave them like a torrid. I think they both scored. And they're both like quite handy footballers and strong. Like Furs is a strong boy, as is Kev. And he had a torrid, and he got taken off at half time, didn't he? I think he did. And then we never saw him again, which is just magnificent. Like, that wouldn't happen on a Sunday, would it? And this is by no means having a go at Joe or the club. The club was, you know, really well run in comparison to everywhere I'd been. And Joe's a legend, isn't he? And we were just like in dire straits. I don't remember who was injured, but it was amazing. I love that story. Yeah, we didn't see him again. I don't even think he came training, honestly.
I think it might even be Joe. I think someone's got his shirt as well from that 45. I'm sure one of the Blue Monday listeners has got the shirt, which presumably is absolutely drenched with sweat then from that 45 minutes.
It's mad.
What about this BBC thing? How did you hear about it? Do they have to give you a heads up?
Well, because I've done quite a lot of work for the BBC down in Swindon for BBC Radio Wiltshire, kind of the years after I retired. I know a lot of the people down there, and because there's a lot of Swindon mentions in the prior episodes, the previous seasons, they take the mickey out of Luke Norris at one stage, and she's always Kerry Mucklow is the character's name. She's always got the Swindon shirt on. Swindon posters and such like. One of the girls just texted me from the Beeb down there and said, by the way, you're getting a mention, because they've been on obviously doing the rounds, doing the promotional stuff prior to it being released, the last series. And I thought, oh, brilliant, you know, it'll be like, you know, Super Sammy Parkin or whatever, you know, a glowing reference at some stage. And then obviously it starts off quite nicely. He says, oh, you know, this is a bit like, I can't remember the scenario, but it's a bit like when Super Sam left Swindon and we all loved him, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but he went to Ipswich and then he was useless, is basically the gist of it, and nothing become of his career and all that. So obviously me and my girlfriend, I think we just had our first son. We were in a flat in Twickenham at the time, and all set up for it, probably got a little takeaway or whatever.
Oh, stop it.
And I've gone like buzzing initially, and then like my heart has sunk. I think anyone who's watched this today will realise I'm quite a sensitive soul. My heart has like sunk. I was devastated. And but yeah, a lot of people text me and all that off the back of it. And on the Totally Football show, which I obviously did for the last few years, we got his name's going to escape me now. We got the lad on. What's his name? Kurt, is it?
I wasn't even aware of this. He's
a big Fulham fan. He's a big Fulham fan anyway, but he's from the West Country. So when we were having a little bit of patter before we went and recorded, I went, you basically, like, with jest, but I went, you killed me there. I said, you're not real Swindon Town fans, considering what you said about me, like with a smile on my face. And he was quite bashful. He was like a little bit, a bit sorry about that, Sam. I had a laugh, but I think he probably realised that it was maybe a bit strong, but it was all good fun.
Amazing. Sam, I think we've covered all of the questions. You said earlier in the podcast about this race now currently this season. I know if I ask you in 2 weeks' time at the end of the window because it looks like Plymouth have gone, it looks like Ipswich have gone, Sheffield Wednesday haven't gone yet, and then there's Derby who could catch if something. How are you seeing this this League One title race at the moment?
Let me just get the league up. Mate, it's a big question, isn't it? Because I'll be honest, a few weeks ago I thought that Sheffield Wednesday weren't as good as Plymouth and Ipswich, and that was my honest take on it. But
Sam, I had Plymouth dropping off about 4 weeks ago, and they won 4 games on the trot. So.
Yeah, and we'll have to wait and see with them. Sorry, with Sheffield Wednesday. Listen, they're on a brilliant run, and I think they've got 100% a squad capable of staying the distance now. I question whether Darren Moore has been good enough in that role for the quality of player that they've got. But I think that can mask that a little bit this year, and they have momentum, and they've got quality. Plymouth, it's going to be interesting to see how they get on without Whittaker. But
what about Tyreek Wright? That went through last night as well. You liked him at Bradford, didn't you?
On the face of it, it looks like a really clever acquisition because he stood out for Bradford this year. A similar type of player, I think, could play as a 10, can play wide, get at people, can score goals. It looks like they've just tried to replicate what Whittaker was bringing them. So that looks like a real sensible piece of business. We have to wait and see it to how it translates because still feels like there's a bit of jeopardy about it. Whittaker felt like it was a bit more of a sure thing. So, but they've surprised me, to be honest, because maybe doing him a disservice, Stephen Schumacher, I wasn't convinced they were the real deal, but having responded to that, I thought it was going to always be important how they responded to the first defeat at home. And I think they've been unbeaten since Port Vale beat them. So I think that's a sign of a side, again, that are going to be there for the long haul, which is not great for you. But, you know, Ipswich become a different proposition with these couple of signings in the window. That's my honest truth. When I talked around the Exeter-Ipswich game, which Ipswich won convincingly, that I covered for Sky, I felt that the season was probably going to be determined by what happened in the next couple of months. And they've seen it fit to go and get a couple of extra players up front. And yeah, that should be enough. Who's going to do it? I mean, I don't know. It's going to be so tight. But I think the best coach is McKenna, is my gut. And, you know, that's not just a throwaway remark. I've obviously spoken to a lot of people in the game, spoken to a lot of people close to Ipswich. I've watched a lot of it, speak to a lot of opposition managers. And Schumacher's definitely got something about him, hasn't he? But Kieran McKenna, I still think is going to prove to be a top manager of the team.
I hope you're right. And I just have this sense now, Sam, there's these two. So Ipswich have played at Plymouth and lost, and they played at Sheffield Wednesday and were 2-0 up and drew 2-2. And I think the Ipswich fans will obviously correct me in the comments. I think it's in the space of the next 4 weeks. I think it's Plymouth at home for Ipswich is the next game. And then Sheffield Wednesday at home is in February as well. It feels like the teams may match each other up going and playing against the bottom half teams, but it just feels like there's a couple of games that you don't want to draw there. You have to take the advantage when they're right in front of you. Do you take my point?
Yeah. I mean, only the lads in the dressing room would know right now, but I mean, it doesn't half help if you can go and reinforce an area of the pitch where you've been struggling. And, you know, if is he suspended now, Jackson?
I don't believe so, no.
No, did he, have I made up? It's the other Jackson that got sent off in that Lincoln game. That's how my mind works, doesn't it?
Yeah, Adam Jackson. Yeah. For Lincoln,
Sorry, yeah. So, I was thinking Caden Jackson got sent off, but he did.
Yeah, he won the foul, didn't he?
He did. So I was just going to say, like, he's probably not the option, you know, up front any longer. Dapo clearly has had a few doubters, but has had a decent return. But I just think to boost those areas of the pitch could give them real strength in the forward positions. And there's not too much wrong, is there? I mean, I think we were kind of noting a few weeks, maybe a couple of months ago, that maybe there was a little bit of a weakness from set pieces, from wide deliveries, but that's not been obvious to me in the last few performances. Still been a lot to like, and the return to goals of some of the forward players to aid what the centre forwards will bring should put them in good stead. But yeah, it's going to be. It looks like it's going to be a colossal battle. And was it Matt Jarvis the other day said about Derby not being out of it? I mean, they've got great momentum as well, and they may add as well if they can in January. I'm not sure if they can, but
there's normally a workaround with these embargoes if it's an obligation to buy, or just cleverly structuring a deal sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, so I wouldn't discount them completely, but yeah, it looks like it's going to be incredibly exciting. And but I will stick with my predictions, Ben. I think Ipswich will do it this year.
I will not pass comment whilst being very smug and happy that you've said that. Look, Sam, thank you so much, and thank you for being so open about, obviously, things maybe not working out exactly how you'd have wanted to at Ipswich, and being real honest about it.
No worries, mate. I hope it.
I think people are going to really.
I hope I didn't upset anyone. I hope I didn't.
No,
yeah.
Only that bloke at Brighton. He's been upset. He's been.
I
wonder
if he knows that was the target of my venom.
Remember, it's a small world, so we will find.
Probably you, mate. I think he had a hat on. Glasses.
There you go.
Hat and glasses.
I didn't have
Guess Who.
I didn't have lovely, beautiful long hair back in 2006, but that way. Sam, you're all over the place on Chelsea TV and on ITV and on podcasts. Where can and people find you and on social media?
I'm Sammy Parkin at Sammy Parkin _. Yeah, I've got a bit of a quiet week, really. I think I'm covering the Chelsea game against Palace at the weekend, and I'm back on the EFL highlight show on ITV on the 21st, which will be a week on Saturday. But yeah, and if I can plug my podcast, Ben.
Yes, do it.
What the EFL, which is just a continuation of our Totally Football League show, which we did for the last 3 or 4 years. Same squad, me, Matt Davis-Adams, who is a podcaster, commentator at Chelsea TV, and the former Stevenage Southend winger, Adrian Clark. So 3 of us just chew the fat, basically, about the results. And we're going to have some managerial guests on in the next few weeks as well. So maybe we get your man McKenna on at some point.
No, I will ask about that off air then, Sam. But thank you so much for joining us, guys. As ever, subscribe, YouTube, like, blah blah blah, and go and say thanks to Sam over on Twitter. Thank you for listening to the Blue Monday podcast.